Okay, looks like that is going. So I will welcome everyone to the meeting of the EQB's Environmental Review Implementation Committee, or ERIS, June 18th, 2025. I'm Sarah Stroman. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources and the Chair of ERIS. And we wanted to go ahead and get going. I think Commissioner Kessler is working on joining us from a remote location, but I think in the interest of getting to our agenda, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Kashlyn Nuschler, to take the role.
Okay, thank you. I don't believe Commissioner Arnold can join us, but just checking, Commissioner Arnold? No. Member Bauer-Kemper?
Here, thanks.
Commissioner Dobbenberger?
Here.
Member Hintz?
Sorry, did you just say me?
Yeah, so you're here though, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Riley. I don't believe we have Chair Holman joining us, but just double checking, Chair Holman. And has Commissioner Kessler joined us? Do we have Board Member Nelson? And Commissioner Stroman?
I'm here.
You're here.
Still.
So with that, Chair, that gives us 4. Our quorum is 5, but we are expecting Commissioner Kessler, and we're really kind of just doing informational items today on things that will come back to the board. So if you're comfortable moving forward, we could do that.
I am, since we are here and ready to go, I think we will go ahead, and we will hope that Commissioner Kessler is able to connect shortly.
We do have to skip the minutes.
Okay. Yes, so we will skip the minutes approval, the consent agenda, and we will not be able to formally approve the agenda for today either. So I think what we will do is we will go ahead with this preliminary agenda, and we will move through the preliminary agenda and the informational items without the vote, and then hopefully when we do achieve a quorum, we can come back maybe and pick up the formality. But as you noted, since they are not decision items that we will be voting on, I suggest we just move forward with the preliminary agenda.
Okay.
And so with that preliminary agenda that we're going to follow, I will move into the Executive Director's report and turn it back over to Kashlyn Nuschler, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair. I should have noticed, I know we have a few other EQB board members joining us, listening in. Glad to have you for some of these more in-depth info items. So thanks to all of you that are here today. If you are online, well, even if you're in the room, the meeting is being recorded. Our meeting chat is open and visible to everybody, but we do not retain that chat as part of the meeting records. So it should only be used for logistical information if you can't hear us, if you can't see the slides, something like that. The presenters today welcome questions and feedback from the board members and the ERIS members, and there will be specific time for public comments, input, even though there are no decisions being made today. So when we get to that point, if you're online, please use the raise hand function or identify in the chat that you would wish to speak. For ERIS members, if you have questions, it is helpful for us if you have your camera on when you do that. All right, I think that's it. I think everyone attending is online. So when we get to the input section, primarily on item the energy infrastructure permitting item, or at the end of the meeting, please go ahead and use that raise hands function. And as a reminder, information is also on page 2 of the meeting packet. In terms of the reports and announcements, I would just give a little bit of a legislative update. Now that the bills have passed, the environment bill that passed funds EQB at the levels that were recommended by the governor. That did include a general operating increase to cover higher expenses, which is just about a 3% increase on our base budget. There were also two policy provisions that impact EQB. The first was related to petitions. The legislature modified Minnesota Statute 116 D04, the portion related to petitions, so that signatories must reside or own land in the county of the project that they are petitioning about or in an adjoining Minnesota county. And we do have some info today about petition guidance, so Jesse will talk a little bit about that later. And then the second item is a change or a future change to the process of scoping for mandatory EISs. Currently, the process of doing an EIS, any EIS, always starts with an EAW. And if the project triggers a mandatory EIS, that EAW is used to scope the EIS. And the legislature directed the EQB to change the requirements so that a project that triggers a mandatory EIS does not need an EAW, though it still needs to go through a scoping process. So that is something that was not in your packet, but will be on our work plan for the next period of time. Also related to our budget, the state government bill that passed this year contains some changes that allow for a longer time to spend appropriated funds. And we're looking into how that will allow us to spend some of our remaining funds on the climate calculator tool in order to continue to improve that and particularly focus on kind of our two big wish list items. I will talk more about that in the work plan as well. On a calendar note, the board will not meet in July. We will take a summer vacation. The August meeting will likely be pretty full with at least 2 decision items, possibly 3. September would normally be scheduled as an ARIS meeting, but we're likely to move that to a full board meeting in order to talk to you all about the climate action framework that we've been hinting at for a little while, and potentially also for a decision item on the rulemaking, kind of depending on how the timing goes with that, whether that will be in August or September. So that's our calendar. Take a break in July, be ready for August and September. We'll have a lot going on. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Executive Director Nuschler. I do want to see if there are any questions from ARIS members on any of the items that our Executive Director shared with us. Not seeing any hands online, and Commissioner, nothing? No, okay, great. In that case, we will move to the first major item on our preliminary agenda. And we have Colleen Hetzel here, our Director of Environmental Review Program, to present an update on the staff's work to develop the required revisions to the environmental review rules to conform with recent Energy Infrastructure Permitting Act legislation. So Colleen, thank you for being here, and we're excited to hear the update on the rulemaking.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pulling up a PowerPoint presentation that you all should see momentarily.
It worked great this morning, Colleen.
It always works well in the dress rehearsal.
It is coming. Thank you for your patience there. Hopefully it lives up to its hype. All right, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. As Catherine mentioned, I'm here to talk about the Energy Infrastructure Permitting Act, which we have talked about a little bit in the past, but I'm here today to provide you with a little more information and also to discuss two options that I would like more feedback from you all on. So the outcomes that we're looking to go through today, I will again provide that background on environmental review over the years, because environmental review for energy has been more unique than other mandatory category areas over the years. I will also give you a background on the Minnesota Energy Infrastructure Permitting Act as well, just because it's still new, and remind you of some of the things that were included in that legislation that was passed. And then I will go through two draft approaches or options that EQB has been discussing to conform the Minnesota Rule 4410 with Minnesota Statute 216I. Then I will briefly go through the next steps, and then I'd like to focus on feedback from you all today, if possible. So just a little history on energy over the years. Energy projects have been in part of environmental reviews at the beginning. It started with the Power Plant Siting Act, which was actually under Minnesota Rule 4400 at the beginning. And then there have been many changes over the years, with one of the more significant ones being in 2005. That's when the majority of the projects were transferred to the PUC as the main RGU for a lot of those. And then over the years, there were also some other statutes that were enacted when renewable energy projects started to become mainstream in Minnesota, and it's very tiny font, but some of those are related to wind projects and the like that have happened over the last few years. And then recently, with the passing of Minnesota Statute 216I, it basically consolidates a lot of those into one location to make it a lot easier for people to find information about these energy projects. It also repeals a few of the rules that have been created over the years too, and lays out the process within the statute itself for some of those. Here's a brief look at some of Minnesota Statute 216I. But what I do want to focus on are calling out that not all energy projects are contained in this statute. So I want to make sure that I provide you with the information of the projects that are highlighted in this statute. They are high voltage transmission lines, large electric power generating plants, energy storage systems, large wind energy conversion systems, solar energy generating systems, and then what are called associated facilities, which are some of those buildings and other pieces of energy projects that are associated with energy project. And it basically just ties those in and says that those should also be considered with the energy projects that are in Minnesota Statute 216I. Another thing that I would like to call out that the legislation does, in Minnesota Rule 4410, we have mandatory categories, and they are divided by EAWs and EISs. The way that Minnesota Statute 216I works is they have three types of environmental review that are called out for the projects. One is major review, which is the equivalent of an EIS. And then the other two types of review are standard review, which is an environmental assessment. And all of the standard review projects that do an environmental assessment, the PUC is the RGU. And then the third category are local review, which is also an environmental assessment, but that can be done by a local governmental unit, or the local governmental unit can request that the PUC do the environmental review for the project as well. So that's different than how Minnesota 4410 lays out environmental review. So I wanted to make sure that I pointed that piece out. And then just a reminder that within the legislation that was passed, EQB was granted the authority to adopt expedited rulemaking to make sure that Minnesota Rule 4410 does conform with 269. As I mentioned, there were a few rules that were repealed with this legislation, as well as a few statutes, which just means that some of those things are just going to have a break, where in our rule, the rule was written to let people know definitions existed in a statute that might no longer be out there, or a rule that no longer exists as well. So the changes that we're doing to conform are not major changes. They are basically conforming our rule to make sure that it still matches with Minnesota Statute 269. This is the parts of Minnesota Rule 4410. Not all of them are up there, but I wanted to highlight the areas that we're looking to do conforming, where the rules will do conforming. And as you can see, there aren't a lot of areas that we're going to need to conform. The majority of the areas that I've called out on the right hand of the slide are definitions. There are some new definitions or updated definitions that I'll talk about in a little bit, but also then mandatory categories, both in the EAW and EIS areas, and then also some publication requirements that will have to be looked at for conforming. Here are some of the definitions that EQB is looking at potentially adding or needs to change based on the legislation. So there were past definitions of high voltage transmission lines, and a new definition was passed with the legislation. There's also a large electric power generating plant, and so that right now that would also need to be updated. And then the last one is the definition for associated facilities that also changed with the new legislation. So those three definitions, EQB has a definition in Minnesota Rule 4410 right now, but those were updated with the passing of Minnesota Statute 216I, and those definitions have been changed and would need to be changed as well in our rule. There are also several new definitions that are not currently in Minnesota Rule 4410, and there's potential that we would need to add them depending on how we do conforming. And so I've highlighted a lot of them are the energy project areas that we just walked through earlier, adding in some of those renewables and other project types that we don't necessarily have in Minnesota Rule 4410 currently, because they were done through a statute or a separate rule process. And then one other thing that was in the legislation are carbon dioxide pipelines and the requirement that they undergo an EIS. And so that is also a possible definition that we would need to add, and then as well as a definition for environmental assessment. So I'm going to go through the two different options. Nothing has been decided on these. These are the two things that we'd really like to hear feedback. I'm going to present two different ways that we could conform the statute and the rule. And they are at the early phase, so we are still asking for feedback on these. The first example would be that everything stays in, all the energy projects stay in Minnesota Rule 4410, and that we would add in all of the energy projects that are in 216I that are not currently in Minnesota Rule 4410. This would act as basically a clearinghouse so that all types of projects are present in Minnesota Rule 4410, so that anyone coming and looking for information on environmental review would see all of the different types of projects that need to undergo environmental review. And so even though they wouldn't necessarily be using the process outlined in Minnesota Rule 4410, they would still see exactly where they should go to find the information to do environmental review. So I pulled one example. It's a current mandatory category under Minnesota Rule 4410.4300, which is an EAW mandatory category. It's item C. It's under the electric generating facilities, and this is for an electric power generating plant that is over at a capacity of 50 megawatts or more. This is a project that is captured in 216I currently. And so this is something that was also in Minnesota Rule 4410. But in order to conform it to 216I, this is an example of a way that we could do that. Don't focus on the language that we put in there as an example, but more so the idea or the concept of it remaining in Minnesota Rule 4410, but then altering it to make sure that people understand that are coming to do environmental review for this type of project, that it still remains there and they understand that they still need to do environmental review, but it then directs them to visit 216I to find the process that is outlined in Minnesota Statute 216I for environmental review, and then also the other rules that might be applicable from PUC. So the focus for this option is that EQB would keep all of the information and we would add in additional mandatory category thresholds for the energy projects that are not in Minnesota Rule 4410 now, as well as all of those definitions that we also do not have in our rule currently, to kind of create that clearinghouse effect. So that's option one. The second option is to create a new part within Minnesota Rule 4410 that does not exist. And that would house all of the energy projects that are within 216I. And that would basically have verbiage that says, if you are looking to do environmental review for a project, for an energy project that is outlined in Minnesota Statute 216I, this part would direct you to Minnesota Statute 216I to follow the process that's outlined there. This would not be a clearinghouse example. We would remove all of the projects that are now in Minnesota Rule 4410 that deal with energy projects that are outlined in 216I, which does mean that a few projects would remain because they are not in Minnesota Statute 216I. But the majority of energy projects would be in the separate call-out part, and they would direct the RGU or the project proposer that's looking for additional information about environmental review to Minnesota Statute 216 for more information. One of the benefits of this is that the majority of the energy projects that are outlined in 216I no longer go through an EAW process. And so this is, sending them back to follow a process that is an EA or an environmental assessment, as opposed to housing some of those projects under the EAW category when they're truly not undergoing an EAW review. And then it also puts them back into the statute that outlines the process very well and very thoroughly for those types of projects. So those are kind of some of the pros and cons. And what that would look like, for example, is, and there would be more language, but in that new part that's created, there would be language that basically says any large energy infrastructure facility should now follow the RGU selection and review requirements in Minnesota Statute 216I and the rules applicable to that chapter. So, and there would be additional information that's necessary to conform, but that's the main idea of creating that new part. I wanted to include some options of some of the categories that would also be removed if this were the option that were selected for us to move forward with conforming. So I had just highlighted one of those electric generating facility projects that's currently in Minnesota Rule 4410. And basically that would be deleted from our rule because now it's in that new part that tells you to visit 216I to find information for the environmental review process under Minnesota Statute 216I. So that's an example of some of those projects that would be removed from our rule. And then finally, I did want to talk about some of those projects that would remain in Minnesota Rule 4410 that are energy projects as well. There are 2 EAW projects that would remain under the electric power generating plant subpart, and that those are both facilities that do not meet the new definition or the definition of a large electric power generating plant. A large electric power generating plant is 50 megawatts or more, but currently we have 2 EAW thresholds that are below 50 megawatts. One is an electric power generating plant between 25 megawatts and 50 megawatts that requires an air permit, and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is currently the RGU for that project. We did have a conversation with them, and they would like this category to remain, and they are comfortable remaining the RGU for this one. The second one is the same type of project. It is an electric power generating plant between 25 megawatts and 50 megawatts, but it does not require the air permit. And that the current RGU is a local governmental unit. And we are also recommending that that stay as well within our within Minnesota Rule 4410. The last type of project, energy project that is in 4410, EQB is recommending be removed. It is the construction of a transmission line. So it is not a high voltage transmission line because it does not meet the definition. It's a transmission line between 70 kilovolts and 100 kilovolts with 20 or more miles in Minnesota. This is a type of transmission line that is not actually built in Minnesota. It's not, we've had discussions with the energy industry, and it is something that is inefficient to connect to the grid, so it is not used. We also, in looking at the definition of associated facilities, which are those facilities associated with these energy projects, we believe a significant number of smaller transmission lines would fall into the definition of associated facility. And so this would, it doesn't really serve a purpose as much anymore because we don't have these lines, and we also have the new definition of associated facilities. So we're writing up a justification to recommend that that is removed from Minnesota Rule 4410. So then to touch on next steps, we're here talking to Eris today to try to get some feedback. We're also going to be getting some feedback. We're going to have a meeting with the tribes next week to also share ideas with them. And then we would like to talk at the August full board meeting more in depth about some of the language that we intend to propose to conform Minnesota Rule 4410 with Minnesota Statute 216I. And depending on if the board is comfortable or not, we can either have a vote at that meeting or bring it back at the September meeting to talk about it in more detail. And then after that, we would, once the board has approved the draft of the bill language, we would put it on notice and have it go out for comment. That would be done in the fall of 2025 with the full rule being, with the hope of the full rule being approved in early 2026. So that was the 2 options that we have for you today, and we would love to hear feedback from you all.
Thank you, Colleen. That was a very helpful presentation to understand both the changes that are needed and the options to implement those changes. So thank you. Do any of the ERIS members have questions? Member Bauer, Kemper, Member Hintz, I'm asking you first because you're online, and then I'll go to Commissioner Dahlberger.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question. And again, thanks, Colleen, for the presentation. I'm wondering, how is the phrase maybe associated facilities defined, and how are associated facilities identified? And how do folks know if what they're proposing is an associated or would be an associated facility?
Chair, Member Bauer Kemper, that's a great question. So there is a definition that was created. Currently, Minnesota Rule 4410 does have a definition of associated facility, but in the creation of 216I, they changed that definition, and it's, in my opinion, it's more inclusive of the, I'm going to call them peripheral buildings and other items that would be associated with an energy project. And I don't have the verbiage off the top of my head, but basically it's the buildings that are associated with the project that are necessary for the project to be able to work. Like I mentioned, the transmission lines, the small transmission lines that are part of the project that require, like the facility itself wouldn't be able to operate without those. Those would be included. It does not include pipelines or anything like that, but it would include the other necessary elements for that facility to be able to operate as an energy facility.
Thanks.
I can send you the definition after this as well. That's helpful.
Other questions from our two members online or Commissioner Daubenberger? Okay, yeah, go ahead,
I
Commissioner.
do have a question first. Colleen, thank you for thinking through this and providing these options. And I understand we're going to talk more later this year, make official recommendations, but of the two options, and my simple summary sounds like one would be to include those projects under the current statute, one would be making a subpart. Is there one of the two options that staff is recommending at this point? If you mentioned it and I kind of missed that, I'm sorry, but sounds like you're being pretty objective about the two different options.
Chair, Commissioner Daubenberger, I don't think there are pros and cons to both. So I think, the first one where you're adding everything in, it definitely, I think a lot of people come to Minnesota Rule 4410 looking for environmental review and how it should be done, or just to see if their project triggers mandatory category. So it is nice to have that basically a clearinghouse, everything included, so that people know just looking in one place that yes, my project, I see it right here. It's called out. I know I have to do environmental review for that. I think the benefit of the other one though is that it's very clean. Those projects are being reviewed by the PUC. And that process is outlined in 216I. And so it's easy to also just basically say, if these are this type of project in one location, that instead, and we would still call out those types of projects and make sure it's very clear what those projects are, that instead of looking for environmental review, the process here, you can just go straight to Minnesota Statute 269. So it's cleaner. It would be it would be a lot less conforming, a lot less words that we would have to change within Minnesota Rule 4410 if we did it with adding in part.
One is kind of one-stop shopping, and then the other one is just more clean and direct.
But can I just ask a follow-up to that quick, and then I'll go to you, Executive Director. In either case, you have to go to 216I to get the information that is specific to those projects, right?
Correct.
So to your point of like the direct route, I don't know, I may be oversimplifying this, but it seems like a lot less conforming work and work on the EQB staff's part to conform the rule when somebody's going to have to just go look for the information at 216I anyway, and so you get there faster.
You're correct. Yeah.
Okay.
It would, I mean, there would still be, they would see their project very specifically called out. But again, in order to look at the process,
You still need, Executive
Yeah,
Director.
sure. I was just going to mention, I think, I would say, I would think there's a slight lean towards the just make something new that more recognizes that the legislature has said there's a different process for these energy ones. This is, and they even say in 216I, this is the only environmental review that's needed, and it's a slightly different process. So I think it helps provide a little clarity on on that piece as well by sort of recognizing that grouping of projects is distinct. So I think that's one of the benefits that we've tossed around that has some appeal, I think.
Thank you.
But I will just add, making sure that then that doesn't break everything else is always kind of the tricky part.
Maybe I'll ask this of ARIS members, and then I will also provide an opportunity for other EQB board members to weigh in with any advice, since we have some here. But are there any EQB members who have a strong opinion or even a moderate opinion about the two options and wish to provide advice to staff on the approach? I am not seeing any. I will just add my own. I think for the reason you just outlined, I would also lean to the less upfront work and the more direct getting people to 216I, but I would also not object to the other one. So I did see Member Hintz come on with her camera. So I want to see Member Hintz, did you have something to add in?
No, not really. I just wanted to show that I was present.
Thank you for that.
But I don't really have a preference here.
Okay. Other EQB board members who are present here, did anybody want to weigh in? If so, please raise your hand and we can make that happen, but we'll take the opportunity since you are attending here. If you have some advice you'd like to share with the subcommittee and staff, we'd love to hear it. And I am not seeing any hands raised. So I think we have shared with you, that we don't have a strong preference, and either way will work. I think what we'd like to do, though, is have an opportunity for the public to make any comments on what staff has presented here. So we do not have any people here in the room, and so I think if there is anyone online who would like to provide a public comment on this item, we would ask that you raise your hand through the raise hand function, and then Rebecca will call on you. Here, I don't see any hands. We can give another couple seconds. So far, nobody has raised their hand. Since we are still not seeing any hands raised, I think we will close the opportunity for public comment on this item. And again, we'll thank the ARIS members for their comments and feedback and questions. And Colleen, thank you very much for sharing with us an update on where you're at and the options for moving forward. We're leaving it in your capable hands.
Thank you. We are, Chair, Colleen, sorry, I missed it if you mentioned it. We have been working with PUC and Commerce staff as well. Closely talking on all these things. So we'll keep doing that too.
Good, perfect. So at this point in the preliminary agenda, we had scheduled a 5-minute break. I will just note we are ahead of schedule. And so I'll just ask if people want to go directly into the FY26 proposed work plan, maybe we could do that and see if folks want to break after that. Are folks okay with that? Thumbs up from Commissioner, and not seeing any other objections. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Catherine, if you want to go ahead and lead us through the conversation on the proposed work plan.
Sure. So I don't usually like to sit with my laptop in front of me. Steph is going to show my slides for me. So Steph, awesome. Thank you so much. So this is our proposed work plan for just for the environmental review team. So we'll go ahead to the first content slide, which will look familiar if you, since I started this, kind of reminding ourselves of the work planning model, how we work down with the strategic plan, setting our overall priorities, and that's finished this year. I think we weren't quite done with it at this time last year. So it's out there setting our priorities. We have the annual board approved work plan to designate the projects, and then the individual work plans and project plans that we use to assign work to staff and to set scope and deliverables of individual projects that we track through staff meetings and check-ins and review of the overall work plan. So next slide, please, Steph. As we've talked about, and as I've used the buffet model in the past, where we figure out we have so much to do, what do we want to actually put on our plates, and are we picking the right things? My goal today is to just get a little input on whether we have kind of the right focus, whether we're meeting the right needs, and are we adequately considering the capacity of ourselves and our partners. So then, Steph, you can go 2 slides. I think we can go to the work plan. So just a reminder, really, when putting together the proposed work and the proposed work plan for the environmental review program, it's really all focused on that strategic plan outcome 3 of how we maintain and improve Minnesota's environmental review program, so that we make sure it meets the objectives of MEPA and those criteria for program effectiveness that the board approved in fiscal 23, and that we're a valuable source of information and that we're really able to monitor that program effectiveness. So our strategies to meet that outcome in the plan focus on guidance and training for RGUs and project proposers, tools and guidance around climate pollution and resiliency, improving our data collection, particularly to support our ability to evaluate the program's effectiveness and our own provision of technical assistance, and then develop and implement updates to environmental review rules. And I would say also sort of program how the program uses those rules in order to provide clarity in implementation. Moving on to strategy 1 and the work for that, which is on the next slide. Again, that support of RGUs and project proposers. So in this space, we have our ongoing work of technical assistance, and then the staff have also recently started to do more general training. As we talked about last month, we did an ER 101 that was very well received, and the staff has already started and will continue through fiscal 26 with climate calculator training. And then we'll be looking to move into what you might call sort of enhanced basics for environmental review, digging more into depth into some specific topics that based on feedback we got during the first training. And we think there's sort of always going to be a need for environmental review 101 as new folks come on to local governments and to state governments. And so we'll likely continue to provide that as well. In terms of some specific projects to update our guidance documents, you'll hear from Jesse in a minute here about updating petition guidance for the public. Once that's complete, which it's getting very close to, and so it's really, I think, going to be a fiscal 25 finished project or close, we want to provide some information to RGUs on how to evaluate a petition. Sarah has also identified some key needs for AUAR guidance and updates because our documents are from 2008 and 2015. And she will be working to move those forward. And then finally, Kayla is continuing to work on guidance and best practices to support RGUs and particularly LGUs that aren't subject to the same requirements as state government for tribal coordination and consultation in effectively recognizing tribal resources and engaging with tribal nations throughout the process. So she's been working on that, and actually I believe PUC is working on something similar that we're hoping to borrow from. And then through all of this, as we have been this year, we're working to make our guidance more accessible, easier to update, more web-based. So we moved away in fiscal 25 from 2 giant PDFs. They're still available, but we're trying to provide more web-based format of our guidance. So we've done that with EAWs and are continuing to look to do that as we update all of these pieces. Well, so most of these, I think you kind of have heard about in the past. The one new thing on the next slide is that we want to review and update the formatting of the EAW form. When we were working with the MPCA team to do the feedlot alternative EAW form and in moving that forward, they really kind of the team that focuses on accessibility and good forms over at PCA raised a bunch of questions, and we thought, oh, we probably should modernize this form and increase accessibility and readability and user understanding. So that is something that we hope to take on next year, not substantive content changes, not changes to what's needing to be provided by project proposers or RGUs, just modernizing it. We're also continuing to track MPCA's air focused cumulative impacts rulemaking, which I believe I heard this morning is hoping to be in a pretty solid place by the end of the calendar year. In fiscal 26, EQB staff will support work on a pilot or an example project that demonstrates potential ways to include that kind of cumulative impacts analysis and environmental review. Noting that might be different than the way our rules define cumulative impacts, and that's something we'll need to continue to think about over the years. But doing that will help us begin to identify changes or needs to environmental review to better support that cumulative impacts analysis that MPCA might need for their projects and others might be interested in as well. So I think, again, tracking in this pilot form in fiscal 26 or pilot project with more work to come in fiscal 27. That sounds like a long way away as MPCA finishes up their rulemaking. So those are our strategy 1 project. Moving on for strategy 2, on the next slide, the tools and guidance on the inclusion of climate pollution and resiliency. Obviously, big, huge strides on this work in fiscal 25 with the development of the climate calculator tool and the associated user manual, which are kind of in soft launch right now and will be pushed out more formally starting July 1. As I said, training's already begun and will continue. And then moving into the beginning of fiscal 26, we'll be updating the EAW climate guidance to reflect the availability of the calculator as a tool. And then we know there's more things that we wanted to include in the calculator and weren't able to meet the deadline of June 30th, 2025. One concern is the fact that the calculator doesn't explicitly quantify mitigation and provides qualitative suggestions, and then the user can sort of iterate possibilities to identify the mitigation. We had been planning to develop some documentation on how to do that, maybe a white paper, some examples, and may still do that, but the recent change to the budget that allows funds to cross bienniums, I think may allow us to spend the small amount of money that was remaining in this appropriation, which we're hoping then we can potentially pick up this mitigation piece and also add some work on decommissioning. I think those were really the 2 big pieces that during the scoping process was determined we didn't have the time to do that we would like to add. So we'll see how those goes with we're starting to talk to contracting right now, but hopefully we will be able to do more support for quantitative mitigation one way or another and hopefully expand the calculator. Those are our big climate work. Moving on to strategy 3 on the next slide about data collection. Again, that's particularly to support our ability to evaluate the program effectiveness and our own provision of technical assistance, kind of making sure we're meeting the needs. If we find the data tells us we aren't, I think that would influence what we know we need to do under strategy 1. At any rate, we had a ton of projects that were completed in this area in fiscal 25. And many of those projects basically move into ongoing work. So the data dashboard maintenance, the RGU and customer service surveys to get more information, and then some improved internal data tracking. So we want to make sure that we are not, that we're actually improving our use of data and not just adding data, but not actually incorporating it into the way that we understand and evaluate the program. So we're suggesting just one new project in this area for fiscal 26, looking into how we can better understand the ways in which environmental review leads to environmental benefits. In particular, we want to better implement the rules that are designed to help EQB understand the ways in which an EIS is considered in later permit decisions. And then also how we can use the information that we have to dig into the benefits and mitigations included in EAWs. And then Jesse and I are also talking about sort of how frequently should we update our data management plan. I think we did update it early fiscal 25, late fiscal 24, and it's sort of what's the right cadence for that, again, to make sure we're not just adding things just to add them. All right, and then the last piece here, strategy 4 on the next slide, which calls for us to evaluate and develop updates to support program effectiveness and clarity in implementation. As I noted, the strategy does focus on rule updates, but I think we can view it as relatively broader and think about changes that are more about better implementation of the existing rules and practices rather than actual changes to the rules. And those kind of make sense to me under this strategy. So that being said, we have a lot of rulemaking on our plates this year, and those projects are likely to take up a big piece of our capacity. So we have 3 legislatively suggested or mandated rules, which I think we've talked about. We need to complete this energy infrastructure permitting rule that Colleen just talked about, which we are hoping to propose in the fall of 2025. And then the gas production rulemaking that you heard about from Jesse in April, which we're likely to propose in early calendar year 2026 to meet the deadline. The legislature established a deadline of May of 2026 for that one. And then I talked about the changes we were directed to make to mandatory EIS scoping as part of the permitting efficiency portion of this year's environment bill. So basically that directed us to change the rules about the scoping and allows us to use the good cause exempt rulemaking procedure, which is very narrow and short, because those are the changes that we're making are only those that are explicitly directed by the legislature. So those 3 rules all get sort of a shorter rulemaking process because they're very narrow in scope, and that will help with capacity. Also note, we have not come up with a timeline at this point for the mandatory EIS scoping when we might start that. The general sort of rule of thumb is that if the legislature tells you to do a rule, you should try to notice it. You need to notice it within 18 months of their direction. So we're still thinking about what the timeline will be on that one and how it fits with the other rules. I'll also note that the staff, led by Kayla, have been gathering ideas for what's known as a housekeeping rulemaking, where we go in and clean up minor things to make the rules easier to read and make sure they're all correct. For instance, we might make sure cross-references are up to date. There's a couple of places in the rules that say things like for subparts 2 through 27, but the section now has 36 subparts and the reference didn't get corrected. And then we've conformed with other legislative changes. So this is something that we want to do, and we're kind of starting to find those things, you know, when we notice them, and making a list, but it will depend on capacity. In fiscal 26, for this one, I doubt we would go any further than maybe the initial request for comments where we go out to the public and say, here's what we want to do, here's the general scope, what do you think, where do we need to make these changes? And then last in this area, we have the continuous improvement process. So the process was done, and particularly the solicitation of ideas from partners and stakeholders in early calendar year 2023. And at that time, we thought we were going to do it every 2 years. We agreed kind of during our work planning discussions last year that that was too often, as we didn't have enough time to actually progress any of the ideas. So we want to move to a 4-year process. And I'm recommending that we solicit ideas in fiscal 26, likely in the spring of calendar year 26. because that will allow us to have a process that lines up with the timelines for making budget and policy requests in the legislative process, so that we would be kind of finishing and compiling the ideas as that process begins for the next budget. So it's only 3 years at this point, but then it would move forward. So one of the things that we would bring forward in August, potentially an update to the resolution about the continuous improvement process to reflect that change. And then the last additional project that we're proposing on the next slide, please, Steph, is to start to take on the work of considering health impacts and environmental review, which I guess it's take on for this staff and maybe this board, but return to this work in the larger sense of the board. There's a lot of interest in this topic. Given the time since the board last discussed this issue, which I believe was pre-COVID, 2018, 2019, what the staff would plan to do is to gather, document, and present to all of the board members kind of the history of the consideration of this issue, to just make sure we're grounded in the past work. And then working with our other partners and stakeholders to develop potential options to move forward, and then provide a couple of paths or recommendations to the board. And then in that evaluation, we could identify what the future projects would be needed to move forward. So this has been, kind of consistently brought forward in the continuous improvement process, mentioned in mandatory categories, et cetera. And I want to be really clear that we're not committing to that at this time that there's some specific way that we think health impacts should be considered. There will likely be many options to make improvement in this area, and we might need to take some incremental steps to do that. So basically, we're just proposing to gather the info, recap for the board what the issue is and where we left it, and do some work to develop a range of options, then looking to take the next steps in following years. So that's the proposed work plan. On my last slide, please, Steph, you would move on to the next one. Just a note that these continue to focus on some of the areas that were suggested to us in the last continuous improvement process, such as evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions, cumulative impacts, data management, and guidance and training. And as I just said, the consideration of health impacts was frequently mentioned. So that is our proposal. And I am happy to answer questions or take input.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Do ARIS members, those of us who are here, have either questions on the draft or proposed environmental review work plan, or comments? We're taking those at this time. Member Bauer Kemper, I'm seeing you unmute.
Thank you.
There's only so many
Sorry.
people to watch this meeting, so.
All right. Well, thank you, Chair. My raise hand function is grayed out for whatever reason. So thank you. And thanks, Catherine, for that presentation. That's a whole lot to it, and I'm probably not keeping up. But a couple of things. One, just a comment that I'm glad to hear about the health impacts consideration. I'm eager to continue down that pathway and rejuvenate that conversation and learn more about it. So thank you for that. Regarding the likely shift in the timeline for the continuous improvement routine, I guess initial question, am I understanding correctly that the solicitation would then happen every 4 years for ideas? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any concern? I guess I have a relatively uninformed concern, but my impulse is to be concerned. For example, when we did the mandatory categories report, there were many gestures and indications through that process that it was not the process for pursuing various ideas that came forth, but rather the continuous improvement process is the process. So will we potentially find ourselves in a situation where we're saying, for example, during a future mandatory categories report process, sorry, this isn't the place, come back to us in 3 3/4 years for the continuous improvement solicitation? Is that, I understand that's kind of an extreme narration of a hypothetical, but is that potentially what may happen?
Chair, I think that's a good question. I really do think like we have more, I don't know, I think more to do to sort of make sure that we're gathering and being clear about the things that have come through the continuous improvement process, that have come through other ways that we have thought about program effectiveness and how to present that and be able to talk about it. I mean, because we remember that part of the continuous improvement process are these annual work planning conversations and how we figure out what to move forward. And that's something that we're still thinking about. And I think will be something we can talk about when we do the continuous improvement. I don't know that I can answer your question, but it is a good thing to keep in mind of how we best manage all those pieces of input and make that sort of holistic, I suppose.
And I would just offer, I don't know, one of the things that occurs to me as I'm thinking about Member Bauer-Kemper's question and Kathleen, your answer, is some of the things that we saw come forward in the mandatory, I mean, that was sort of subset, right? That related to mandatory categories, whereas the continuous improvement is sort of more broad, right? In terms of issues that people brought forward. I think the other piece is when, Catherine, you mentioned program effectiveness, to me, that means something different than, are we making a policy change in the way that we do environmental review? It's like, to me, that is, the policy is here, but we're making the implementation of it more effective. And so I think there's also a question of how are we being clear with what we are soliciting, like with folks, what is the scope of things that we are soliciting, and what's really the scope of things that, might be easy to implement because it is a administrative program effectiveness item within a year versus something that might be a rulemaking that's going to take a while versus something that may be a larger policy change that really is there's a whole process for that, right? That agencies need to follow, and it is not solely going to be the discretion of this board. And I think that's maybe something for us to wrestle with as we go into that solicitation, because I agree with you 100%. What we don't want to do is start pointing to different processes for people to input. And essentially what the takeaway is, it's never the right time because you've always missed some window. And think about how the different opportunities for input work with each other, and also based on the kinds of ideas we might get, what's really the right venue for that, and what's the process, and where does that decision space exist, if it's solely within EQB or it's shared? Because I think that's going to be an important piece of the transparency for people who might want to give us ideas.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate those responses. That sounds good, to be mindful of those factors. I spend some amount of time as a public member stumbling around trying to provide guidance to, constituents or, folks who come with questions, trying to direct them toward certain pathways and venues. And so this also may be part of that discussion that we're also having about public engagement and input with public members. So I appreciate, again, those responses and having our minds on the intersection of these various things. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, and I had some of the same thoughts you noted, Commissioner Stroman, because I do recall as we were going through the continuous improvement process that it was a very robust process. We had a lot of input, and to boil those down to different themes And then from that, the work plan emerged, and now we have an opportunity to update the work plan annually. There are ways, certainly as board members, we all can bring items to refine or change work plans from year to year. But I know at the time we were doing the continuous improvement, there was a sense also for with all the input we're getting, all the things that want to be worked on, how do we manage all that within what can be done, of course, and yet be responsive to those who've asked us to consider these items that they brought up as part of that process. So I'm kind of having a lot of the same thoughts as Member Bauer-Kemper brought up about the cycle on that, but yet, how do we go from boiling the ocean every year to something more manageable? And I think, there's already quite a bit here in the strategies that you laid out as part of this work plan. And I think about greenhouse gas analysis, climate change, the new calculator, the guidance needed on all of that. And then like with changes at the federal level, how we're going to be incorporating that within these different strategies. I think there's already a lot there. And I do think of the continuous improvement process as being a good overarching call out for how can we do better? What do we need to be thinking about that we haven't been working on over the last few years and get that fresh look. But to think about doing a big process like that every year, I think seems a little daunting. But anyway, just some random thoughts I had as we're going through this too. I think these strategies you outlined are good. I think there's already a lot in there to be working on.
And Commissioner, I'll just echo that, and I'll pair it with Member Bauer-Kemper's enthusiasm for the health impact project, because I think that has been on our work plan since 2019, if I'm remembering correctly. And so just as an example of what you're saying, right? Because we took the climate stuff and the greenhouse gas stuff first, and it took us a while to work through that. And we've done really good work on that. And I am also very excited to return to the health impact piece and get some work done there. But I'll just, to your point, some of this stuff is, these are not simple issues and they do take some time. And so I think also wanting to not overload the plates too. And so finding that balance of how do we get a fresh look at things and how do we make sure we're operating within the capacity we have is a really important balance. And I think largely this work plan does that too, right? Which is, Catherine, to your point, the reason we do the work planning. So.
Well, I think, Chair, if I may, I'm kind of hearing, and I think this would have been our plan anyway, but that, as we think about how we craft this, like the solicitation to bring that back, and we'll have a discussion about sort of how we've put forward, this is what we understand from the past. This is what we're working on now. These are we didn't have the new strategic plan when we did the last continuous improvement. So we'll think about how all those things fit together and how, I'm from my days in rulemaking, I know it's very hard to either say to people, what do you think about this whole giant broad topic, and get something useful, because they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, what specifically are you thinking about? Or here's something that's done. And so trying to craft our questions and to the public in a way that helps focus them of the many things, but also allows them to tell us things that we aren't thinking about. So yeah. We'll think about that, and I think plan for that to be a late winter, early spring agenda item to talk about.
Any other questions or thoughts on the proposed work plan from ERIS members? I would also like to, since I'm not seeing any, open up an opportunity for any of the EQB board members who are on the call this afternoon. If you have something you want to share with us on this item, and it looks like we do with Assistant Commissioner Kunis.
We'll need to elevate Myra so she can unmute.
There we go. Thanks so much. I'll just make it real brief and sorry I'm quite late to the conversation. Had some emergency things going on here. I just want to elevate also the uh adding health and slowly and intentionally so it doesn't overwhelm the system or doesn't take the environmental impacts as a secondary, I think is going to be really critical. We really appreciate being part of the conversation when we get to that space. And just want to make sure that we are here and would love to be part of that. So thanks so much, and glad to have this back on or again on the radar of EQB. I know it always is, but good to keep the conversation going. And I will pause there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for the comment and the support. And you were right on time. You weren't late. You were right on time to get that comment in this discussion. So appreciate that.
Good job, emergency.
Any other comments from board members? All right, we've given it its pause and I think you have your feedback. Thank you very much for that. I think at this point we will take a short break and we'll plan to come back in about 5 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Yes. All right, we are coming back, concluding our break. So we're going to take the break slide down and we're going to bring the meeting back to order for our last substantive agenda item. And we're going to have a conversation about petition guidance updates. And Jesse is here to share with us. So thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For those online that don't know me, I'm Jesse Krasinski, part of the environment review team here at EQB. And today I plan to talk about some petition guidance updates. And I'll be honest, usually when I choose an intro slide, I just choose any kind of stock image to kind of jazz things up. But today I chose our actual snapshot from our petition guidance. And as you can see, it kind of paints the picture itself for why I'm talking to you today about the need for petition guidance updates. Before I really get into kind of the information and all the things that we're working on, I just want to remind everybody petition requirements and what that means for what EQB staff does in their piece in evaluating petitions. It also has the very important new update from that was passed in the legislation here with the signature updates. So a petition has a few requirements. Most of them are fairly basic. A description of the proposed project has to include the project proposer, has to designate a petitioner's representative, and then it has to go on to document environmental concerns that those petitioners have from that proposed project. And then one of the bigger ones then is to include material evidence, explain how that material evidence proves or shows that because of the nature or location of that project and those concerns that they have does show the potential for significant environmental effects. And then lastly, a petition has to be accompanied by 100 signatures. And that with that update, those 100 signatures must be from individuals who reside or own property in a Minnesota county where the proposed action will be undertaken, or in one or more adjoining counties. So right away, we do have some guidance updates that we need to do because we have something that's due that was put on our plates. So obviously, something to work for us to do. But other than that, this is what EQB staff does in their sort of role of petition evaluations. Now, staff's role is really just to evaluate the petition for completeness. So we are looking at all the materials that are submitted and making sure that they meet the minimum requirements that were put up on that last slide. So those items A through E, which are documented in Rule 4410, 1100. And then above and beyond that, we also verify that there are 100 signatures, that those 100 signatures are meeting the minimum requirements of being within what was a Minnesota property, but now will have some additional requirements. And then also for material evidence, there's a little bit more that goes into that. Now, staff does not evaluate the material evidence for merit to determine if it rises to the level of indicating potential for significant environmental effects. But there is a piece that we need to actually make sure that it is material evidence. There are certainly issues in the past where things that are submitted don't really rise to the level of actually being material evidence. So there is that little bit of additional evaluation that takes place from EQB staff's perspective. After all those pieces have been verified, then staff go on to assign an RGU. Sometimes these are relatively simple. We just look at the project type, compare it to the mandatory categories, and that mandatory category tells us whether it's a local or a state agency. Other times it's not that easy. It might not have a mandatory category, or the project description might not be as clear. And so there's a lot of trying to figure out where these authorities lie, and then who has the most oversight then of this project to make sense of the RGU. And then also sometimes, very rarely, not often, would staff consider expertise to kind of trump kind of the idea of the typical designation of RGUs from the oversight project as a whole. And then there is a letter that we put together, a lot of guidance in it. Oftentimes for petitions for an RGU, they may have never seen one before. So there's a lot of guidance that goes through just what you need to do next, and highlighting the things that can't go through. Once a petition has been received, there is then a moratorium on that project permits. So there's a lot of information in there for RGUs to process and to assist moving forward. And then additionally, the petition process was not built into the EQB monitor submittal service. And so therefore it also does not populate into the environmental database. So there are some steps that staff have to do to manually prepare that information to be published in the monitor when petitions are complete. So now we can get into the data and kind of the interesting pieces of really why the guidance needs to be updated. So I'm here on the graph here, blue represents complete petitions by year, and green would be an incomplete petition by year. Pretty alarming if you just look at the size of the graphs. Now the numbers, obviously, just the number of petitions that we're getting are climbing, but probably more alarming is the rate at which incomplete petitions are seen to be outracing the total petitions. So really just getting a lot of bad petitions, and can guidance help this? So I do want to dive into that data a little bit more, because I think that there's some interesting pieces in there. If you chunk them into kind of 5-year windows, there's a pretty obvious increase over the last 5 years. Not only, like I said, the incomplete petitions, but complete petitions are also growing. So when you look at the data, staff are spending a third of the time reviewing a petition for completeness at least a second time. So a lot of inefficient time spent from staff perspective, especially that's getting to be more important now that we see the number of petitions in general also increasing. So the idea to really make sure that staff time is well spent, but also the petitioners' times should really be spent. That's a lot of work for them to have to come back and fix. And so I thought this was interesting to see those when you compare these in 2 5-year windows, the additional time that petitioners are spending with EQB staff to see if that changed petition outcomes, and it hasn't. The petitions that are resulting in EAWs really aren't changing percentage-wise. So I did review our existing guidance to kind of just give us an idea of, are there gaps? Are there things that we need to fill? And so the snapshot here is really, this is it. 1 page of petition guidance with a bunch of different links to PDFs. There is a nice video that kind of paints a generic overview of the process, and is really helpful for your first step into the petition process. And in this review, really a lot of the information in this PDFs are pretty solid. There is certainly some outdated pieces, and it sort of lacks in painting this picture that a petition really is a document and you're putting together a lot of these words and other things. So some things there that are lacking, but for the most part, a lot of the information there should address the issues that we're seeing. So the things that we do have for reviewing or for submitting a petition from a public perspective. So we have 3 documents or so. One of them is a signature template. And we see that for almost all of our petitions. It gets used. It does have its own issues. It's not fillable. And you actually have to have some Adobe or PDF savviness to edit it, because it's just kind of old and it has some highlighted things on it. So things that we are going to be doing to address these issues will be on our next slide. But I did want to dive into kind of understanding the issues. Are these an EQB staff? Have we made it harder to submit a petition? And so we know that by looking at the last year's data, we actually had this information as part of the performance report. So I just kind of want to pull it back. We know that we're having problems with signatures. We're having problems with material evidence. Document transfer is we spend a lot of time trying to figure out with these people how to get these large documents to us. And then time. That's the one thing that we really aren't going to ever fix. A lot of people hear about these things last minute and they want to submit a petition and they're just rushed. So that one we're likely never going to fix. But can we fix these other things, or at least attempt to fix these other things, guys? Now, so of the 11 incompletes from 2024, 6 of them didn't have 100 signatures. Pretty alarming. The simplest thing of counting, or just oftentimes people get exactly 100 signatures and 5 of them you can't read. 5 of them left off a city or a zip code. Something simple is left off. Material evidence, 2 of them just provided links. We don't accept that. It has to physically accompany the petition. 3 of them didn't have any material, so nothing was provided. Likely that's a timing thing and they're just rushing to get it in. There were a couple, 3 of them as well, where staff actually did reject them because we did not, there was stuff submitted, but we did not believe that they rise to the level of actually being material evidence. So the improvements. Now we are going to be updating the website. Most of this is ready to go. Our Priscilla, who does a lot of our website, I forgot that she was going on vacation. So I had a little bit of a panic to see exactly what I can do while she's gone. So hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have most of that website stuff launched. We're trying our best to transition away from those PDFs and make sure that, you know, we don't run into what you saw on our opening slide of a really outdated logo, and so we can update things a little bit more easily. But in addition to that, when I was looking at our existing guidance, really the findability of the petition guidance was 4 to 5 clicks through the website, and you really needed to know what you were looking for. So improving that just sort of functionality and that findability of it, I think even just simplifying that will really assist and make things a little bit easier. Now, the modernizing, going away from PDFs, does include things like providing guidance about document transfers and talking about things like Google Drive or Dropbox, something simple that isn't in our guidance currently, but will really help people. Now we are also creating an entirely new template for a fillable PDF that would address each of the items of the petition requirements that I showed on that first slide, those items A through E. And within that template, we do have a little bit of opportunity to provide some guidance and some links. So even if they don't find our website and they happen to find this template, make their lives a little bit easier. And also we're updating the signature template to make that just a little bit more easier. And we had to update the language on it as well. The last thing that we're doing is since petitions do not live or are not able to be housed in the environmental review database, we did want to provide opportunities for examples of petitions. I think that is a really helpful thing when you're first coming to environmental review and you have no idea what it is, to just see an example of petition. So we're going to start putting some of those on our website. We just call it a petition tracking library. Likely we'll only do, you know, that year, the calendar year, and then refresh them as we move forward. So with that, I do want to remind that this presentation was really from the perspective of submitting a petition. We do have guidance from the RGU perspective that talks about what you do once you've received a petition and reviewing that process. So there will be a phase 2. Most of that, like the other guidance, has very good information. It's just locked into PDF, has some outdated things. So we'll do some of that modernization in phase 2. Probably not a ton of updates to it, but similar to what we did here. And then just keep an eye on the monitor. We'll provide an update once these things are live on our website and they can be accessed. Given that the petition language is changing and goes active July 1st, we're hoping to have the website at least the website, maybe not the templates. They have some, we're doing some accessibility checks to make sure that those are ready to go, but at least the website should hopefully be live before that July 1st date.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for questions, but I have just on that last point, do we, because there's that change in the signature process and where people can reside or own property to be eligible, do you anticipate having some flag on the webpage for some period of time, just helping people become aware of that? Because again, passed in a special session, not a lot of people probably aware. I'll admit I wasn't even aware until I combed through some language. So yeah, anyway, I'll just let you answer that.
Chair, yes, I think we'll do our best to highlight as best we can. If we have some functionality in the website, or even if you come to the landing page and there's a note that says, hey, pay attention to something's changed, but it will certainly be highlighted within the guidance piece.
Thank you.
And then Jesse, you're planning to put on the signature template, like what county, like a call out your county, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I didn't put that on there.
Nice.
I guess I didn't really call that out, but this snapshot of the full petition one, but yes, the signature template will include in the description, it says name the county that is located in. And then as you sign, you have to indicate your county as well. Makes it a little easier for both people that are doing it and then staff as well.
Yeah, and that makes it like if I'm approached about signing and I can see the county clearly it's in and say, wait, I'm not in that county or one that's next to that, so maybe I won't sign.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Questions or thoughts from various members? Not seeing anything immediately from our online members. So Commissioner Daubenberger.
Thank you, Chair. And Jesse, thanks for your work on this so far. I'm excited about these improvements. You mentioned about signatures, not able to read signatures, but looks like from the fields, they should be typing in information. And then how do they actually sign? Is that electronic, or I'm kind of curious since I've never been a petitioner myself.
Chair and Commissioner Donovan. So typically they print them out right now. It's almost always printed out and then handed out in hands signed. The new template will have the opportunity to fill out the PDF, and it does have like a digital signature spot.
Okay.
Not sure yet how widely that'll be used. That'll be new. I think people are still probably going to be pretty used to printing it out and doing it in person.
Okay.
But yes, usually as it is now, they're written out and hand signed.
Thank you.
Just use it. I mean, people's signatures are rarely legible. So when we say it's not legible, it's more like their address or their name, not the scribble of their, right? Okay.
Good to know.
Yeah. In order to verify that it meets the criteria for the signature and the real person.
Yeah.
I have one other question since I'm not seeing others, and just do you have a sense in the kind of look back you've done of the reason for incomplete petitions? And do you think, I'm curious if you think any of it relates to confusion over the reason the petition process exists and what it yields. And, because I could imagine there could be confusion over what the petition process actually does and what it yields, and that may cause people to skip over some of the substance versus focusing on the signatures. And is there something, if you think that is the case, is there something we can do in that update to kind of the intro of here's why the petition process exists, and here's what a successful petition could result in, and like, here's what it doesn't do. Oh, you've got to go. There we go.
Chair, great question. You know, in my experience, almost all petitions are from somebody that's very new to the environmental review world.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of issues. I think timing is a big one. But often you're right that the reality of what the petition process is not quite as clear when these petitions come through. Now, with these guidance updates, there is a lot of, please call us, please email us. We're happy to assist, because there's a big difference in assisting a petition before it's submitted versus getting it resubmitted. So I think that will hopefully help those situations. And there is also guidance about contacting, you know, those permitting agencies. So I think there's a lot of information that often they don't have, and they're just trying to get more information. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Final call for questions or thoughts for Jesse on this item from ARIS members or board members, EQB board members. All right, I am not seeing any additional questions. So Jesse, thank you very much, and really do appreciate your attention and thoroughness to making sure that that process is well understood by folks wanting to use it, and can hopefully will result in more complete petitions. So that brings us to our last preliminary agenda. I'm gonna keep bringing that up, which is public comment on any item that didn't already have public comment on it today. So we again do not have anyone in person here who has signed up to speak, but we'll offer that opportunity to any member of the public that has joined us online. If you could raise your hand per the instructions that are visible here on the screen. Essentially, use the raise hand feature in Teams, and Rebecca will call on you. We will pause for a couple moments in case anybody is like me, sometimes struggles to find the raise hand feature. Just going to confirm with staff, they are not seeing any hands. I am not seeing any hands, but okay. So we will close the public comment item, and that brings us to closing and adjournment. So I will, before I adjourn the meeting, just ask if any of the ARIS members have anything they would like to bring up. Okay, I am seeing none, and I am seeing negative head motions. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for today. Thank you all very much for wonderful presentations from staff and good discussion from ARIS members as well as board members. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.